e honare e krowe ki te atua, e maunga rongo ki te mato te whenua, e whakaaro pai ki ngā tāngata katoa me. Pāna e te atua he ngā kau ki roto ki tēna o ngā tau. Whakatongi o tau weirua tapu hei a whina hei tohotoi a māta whiti whakaaro, whiti kōrero. E rungi te take nui i mui a tātou i tēnei rā, ko hiu kai te kuto mātou kai whakaora. Amen.
Thank you very much. Moving on to apologies, we have an apology from Chairman Leader who will be leaving us very shortly, and also from Councillor Crosby for his absence. I believe he's in Wellington on LGNZ business, and I also welcome Councillor Troy Eti on Zoom. There is no public forum. Oh, beg your pardon. We need a mover and seconder with the apologies. Thank you, Councillor Winters. Thank you, Councillor Scott. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. So, as I mentioned, there's no public forum and there are no new items to be added to the agenda, but some additional information I think that we will be provided with. There are no changes to the order of business. And could I have any declarations of interest on any of the items on the agenda? Before I deal with those, I just want to note that I have an interest in the item with regard to the submission on the Rena documentary, because I have been working with the submitter. I don't believe it's a conflict of interest, but I just wanted to bring that to the attention of the meeting. And Councillor Von Dodelson.
Yes, I was interviewed for that same film, so I don't see it as a conflict of interest, but it is an interest. Thank you.
And I am at the same Rotary Club as the producer, but I haven't had anything to do with the film, but just noting that.
That's excellent, thank you. Are there any other conflicts or interests that people want to note? If not, we will move on. There is no public excluded business to be transferred into the open. And now we are up to our report. So our first report is to be presented by Kamaran Perumal and Mark Comp. So I invite you to the table. And this is the item on submissions on fees and charges, statement of proposal and deliberation. So thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. On page 10 of your agenda, we have the outline of the submissions received on the fees and charges statement of proposal. On page 13, you have each of the submissions that received. We received 4 written submissions, both via email and through our online portal, and no submitters wishing to be heard. Through the paper, it was requested that you read those submissions first before reading any staff analysis and advice in the following appendix, so that you consider those on their own merits before reading any staff opinion. In the second appendix, starting on page 15, we have a summary of the issues arising from those submissions, and there are some we recommend that we pursue. The first main issue raised is a number of people raised for various reasons that fees and charges are too high. We prepared a statement of proposal based on inflation forecasts at the time, and we can bring the increase down from 8.1% to 7.7%. It's a relatively small percentage change, but some of the fees are quite large, and it's the appropriate thing to do in terms of our cost recovery percentages. There are some other changes proposed by people that we've discussed in various workshops. One proposal was to increase a range of the deposits. We normally increase the deposits once every 3 years. Those deposits are purely deposit and then actual and reasonable costs are charged for the work done. So we tend to try and keep the deposits at a level that covers most of the costs and then keep them to relatively round figures. So we don't try and index those every single year, keep them manageable. There was a suggestion that some hourly rates for senior staff could rise. When we look at that in detail, while all those staff positions have senior in the title, some types of staff are remunerated at different levels, even if they're, a senior scientist may be paid more than a senior planner. So those recovery rates are commensurate with the remuneration for those individual positions. So we recommend that those stay as they are. A good suggestion from the public to put hyperlinks into the policy, and we look to incorporate that as fully as possible. We just need to make sure that when we do that, we don't have any inadvertent problems if legislation is updated and changed. And then some general commentary around council services. where we just need to go back and explain a bit more about how activities and various costs don't cross-subsidise each other. Happy to take any questions, directions, or decisions from councillors, please.
Councillors, any comments? Councillor Winter.
Well, just with some of the submissions, Mark, some of the suggestions of what we do with our surplus of funds, like in the first one on page 13, use it for halls, water services, we don't get into that space. So when we respond to these people, are we going to say to them, understand your submission, but that's not this is Tauranga City Council or whoever's responsibility, so that we actually personalise those responses to their concerns?
So in that case, yes, that person will get a full response, and I'll probably follow up with a phone call to discuss it, because some of the things about how that works is a little bit technical.
Yeah.
And I don't want it to appear like a cold bureaucratic answer. But with this number of submissions, we will absolutely personalise that response and follow up with a call.
That's what I want to hear.
Councillor McMillan.
So not many submissions. Is that pretty normal, or were you surprised to have so few? And does that usually indicate that things are kind of more or less about right because you haven't had a huge amount of submissions, or do you not draw any conclusion from that?
So historically, we've received around 20 to 30 submissions on the fees and charges of a consultant per annum. So this is a lower number than we would have expected. It's hard to say why we haven't got submissions without speculation, but I think the biggest difference we can see compared to previous years is normally we've consulted in full on an annual plan and an LTP at the same time, which probably grabs some more profile. But this case, we did contact all the consent holders, who are the people that pay the annual compliance monitoring fees. So everyone that was directly impacted has been contacted. We've received submissions through each of our mechanisms, so we know there's not a technical issue. Other than saying why they didn't submit, the only causal things I could see potentially are not consulting on the annual plan or long-term plan at the same time, and maybe we had less change this time, just the inflationary type increase rather than category changes, and maybe inflationary increases are pretty common at the moment. That is pure speculation on my part, but I can't offer that as a definitive conclusion.
Thank you.
Councillor Winter.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'm happy to move this as staff recommendations. But I do want to recognise that when it comes to fees and charges, consents, any of that type of business, we have to be very customer centric. And it's so I'm not opposed to fees, but just the explanation to people, make sure that we're trying to help rather than seen as a roadblock. Thank you. I'm happy to move.
So just for confirmation, so you are recommending 2B with direct specific changes to be prepared. So that's page 10. So you're recommending the drop from 8.1 to 7.7. Is that right? So do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Campbell. I have a question before I put that motion, and that is, in the report on page 11, it says under recommendations we could choose to set a lower percentage. However, this would require a corresponding increase in general rates to cover costs or a reduction in compliance monitoring. So that is, you are referencing going below 7.7 there, were you?
That is an option you have. We put that in there for completeness. It would not be fully in line with your adopted revenue and financing policy, but we try to make sure you have the options available. We recommend 7.7 as the appropriate increase.
That's great. So it won't have any impact on general rates or anything at all. All right. Any other comments or questions before I put the motion? No. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Our next item is on endorsement of our strategic direction. It's on page 52, and I invite Namuja Uchasi to speak to this item.
Tēnā koutou to the Deputy Chair and Councillors. This paper on page 52 of your agendas is the culmination of 4 workshops to help in the development of your strategic direction, which is fundamental to the development of the long-term plan. That's the first part of this paper. There are 2 other parts to the paper as well, in terms of just clarifying the financial strategy process and recommendations in relation to delegating to risk and assurance of how to oversee that process. The third component to this paper relates to Māori Land's rate remissions process and the recommendation to delegate to Committee Māori for the work and the direction on remissions to Māori Land that come through the Committee Māori. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I've just got one before I pass it over to the rest of the meeting. We have using Te Reo as well as English. I just had a question. We have Te Aru Utama is in as without translation. So I just wonder if we shouldn't be translating that into English, please. And also with the vision, we have Striving Together, English statement in the Maori transliteration or translation, but the Maori has not got any English in it. I just wonder why we have got both are in Maori instead of one being in English and one being in Maori as we do for the English version.
So through yourself, in terms of the title for the excellence outcome 5, certainly open to your direction on that. If you would like to see that translated into English, we will certainly do our best to do that. It often does become difficult when you're translating something to get the full essence of what's being proposed, but certainly if that's the direction, we will make that change. In terms of the overarching vision, that vision, as you'll be aware, Thriving Together, Mō Te Taio, Mō Ngā Tangata, has been our vision, that part of the vision for a long time, and it's been quite long-standing. Through the discussions with the committee, that's where we've come to in terms of the development of the updated vision. So again, happy to take your collective direction on that.
I'll leave that to the rest of the councillors to direct us on that. They were just my questions. So do I have any comments or questions?
Just on that last point, I would be very keen to have, if we're going to, spend thousands on translations, we can also translate each language into the alternative. So I'd be very keen to have the whole the te reo part of that translated to English to help understanding of our ratepayers.
We've got Councillor Thompson and then Councillor McMillan and Councillor White.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did raise this at the last workshop we had around a healthy environment and the move that we've made away from physical and natural resources, which of course is in the RMA, to much broader concepts around physical environment and natural ecosystems. And when I look at the definitions of those, they are indeed hugely wider than the natural and physical resources. So I'm simply alerting us to the fact that that is now a very wide brief in terms of our responsibility to physical environment and natural ecosystems. And as I said at the workshop, there was a majority view that this wording was appropriate, and that given that there was that majority view, I was prepared to concede and not press the matter further. But I am raising it because the definitions of those wording is much wider than what we've had previously. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor McMillan.
Just on the previous point about Mō Te Taio, Mō Ngā Tangata, I'm in full support of keeping that in Te Reo. I think it's a phrase that, it is complements well the Bay of Plenty Thriving Together, and I think it would have its meaning slightly lost if it was to be translated. So I'm really keen to see that stay there in Te Reo as a part of the English vision. Thanks.
Councillor White.
Yeah, Madam Chair, if you want the interpretation of Māori into English, then you might end up with another volume. I think if put in the glossary would be an appropriate way to look at that particular translation. Because if looking at Arapotama, the stairways to excellence comes with all sorts of stories around the stairways to the heavens, and the heavens back to us. So, and it's all a very integrated, holistic meaning. So be aware of what you wish for in the context of that. We can be very, very, like Manaakitanga could mean guardianship, but as I've said before, there's a backstory to that actually gives it a deeper meaning.
Councillor McDonald.
Yeah, I just want to support exactly what Tataru has said. And I just want to remind staff too that the translator that we have got to do this is an expert in Te Reo Māori. So he has translated, and while the lens may appear not quite to what you envisage that it should be, there will always be a point of difference, I want to say, in the translations when you're looking from the perspective of Māori and when you're perspective from non-Māori. But I guess, what I want to reiterate around this table is that an expert has been brought in to translate what we are talking about in our plans. And I just want to say, put trust in the translator. He is a qualified translator. And it will never be 100% what you want to envision what it should be. But the purpose of what we are trying to achieve is to have faith in the translator's words and what we are trying to achieve. So I guess what I'm saying is have faith in what's being written, and it is what we are trying to achieve here. Thank you.
Thank you, and I recognise Councillor Thurston, Councillor White and Councillor Von Davison, but I just want to note that I'm looking at page 63 here, where we have Community Outcome 5, Te Arapotama, and to our English speakers that does not mean anything. And I would like to see that as partnering with Tangi Whenua or something like that. I did check the some of the translations, and you are right, Councillor McDonald, they are not transliterations, they are approximations. And so I think it's quite appropriate that we have an approximation for the English version of Te Arapotama. So I'll now recognise Councillor Thurston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just going off on a completely different tangent and wearing my disability rights hat. It's to you, Fiona. We have 3 official languages in New Zealand. And in the event of someone requiring a signer at any of our meetings or workshops, what is the process that the governance team have? Because I imagine I might think that they were scurrying around up and down the street trying to find someone who can do sign language. So.
Absolutely, Councillor Thurston. If there's someone who we do appreciate if people request that first, because we don't normally have someone who can sign at our meetings, but absolutely we can do that. And also in addition to this, we can put this in sign language and put it up on our website. So it is in all 3 official languages for New Zealand.
Thank you. Well done.
Thank you, Councillor White.
Yeah, just to follow on from Councillor McDonald, Māori translations are there to really give holistic depth to what we do, in my view, some added quality and value. It's not there to disrupt the directions we want to head in. So I guess it gets back to the point of faith and trust, that actually we're not here to actually bend the rules so that it actually does not benefit the community as a whole, but actually creates greater quality and depth around the meaning of well-being and the principles and the values that are set, and they are articulated in the reo. And I said before, Arapotama, stairways to excellence, or the pathway to excellence, also can translate to the pathways to the heavens and back, the highest compliment you can pay to any particular thought that we might have around this table.
Councillor Von Davison.
Yeah, thank you. When we look at the strategic direction and the vision, having Te Reo in the English version, we've done that for a long time, and I think that's appropriate. And I wonder whether we should not actually have a footnote on it so that people, because people do want to understand, and it might just be a footnote rather. Right, if you go to a glossary, they can't find it. You know, it gets complicated, but a footnote would work. Just so there's some clarity there. I'm not saying we shouldn't leave them out, the Te because I don't have a problem there, but people do, you know, our public, we want to take our community with us. That's the key thing. And so we don't want to frighten them, you know, by not understanding. So that's my recommendation.
Councillor White, I recognise you again.
Footnote of glossary. If you want a footnote, just be prepared. It could be quite a substantial footnote that ends up being a marathon note.
Councillor McDonald, sorry, Councillor White.
I think, you know, we need to think about this quite seriously because, you know, I'd like to say we also need a footnote in some of this explanations in English as well, not just in Māori. So, you know, let's be quite clear, if we're going to use footnote, it won't just be for Te Reo Māori, it will also be for Te Reo Pākehā as well, English.
Madam Chair.
Because we have people in our communities who do struggle with the language that we use. So, you know, if we're going to use it for one, then let's think about using it for the other.
But this, Madam Chair, can I just finish that this document is bilingual. It's got both versions, and we're just talking about the part where there is there is no translation. That's all. That's the only reason I say a footnote there, especially in the vision. It's really important that people understand our vision, and that's where I'm coming from.
I'm sorry, can I just recognise Councillor Scott?
There's a couple of issues. One is who are the readers of this document, and if I'm just picking up on Councillor McDonald's point, if it's not whichever language is not understandable, then we should look at the type of language we're using anyway. So that's the first point. Footnotes are often a good way of explaining something without interrupting the flow. The other one which worries me a little bit is if there is a difference between the versions, and if our ratepayers are relying on the document to progress a submission of theirs, but there's a difference of understanding. Well, we've gone all the way back to 1840, haven't we? So we created exactly the problem that is, you know, that's still causing grief a century and a half later. So we have to be very careful about what is the document that we are relying on, and then what is the meaning of any translations, which is either from English to Te Reo or backwards.
Councillor McDonald.
I really want to close my views on this particular kaupapa. And basically, yes, I really want to close my views on this particular kaupapa because we could be here all day, and I don't want to be here all day. I just want to say we had agreed that we will do the translations for this document, and we have. And now I'm kind of disheartened now we'll be starting to pick at the translations. And I want to reiterate that what you're seeing here is what we are trying to explain of what our role in our document is saying, but it is done in Te Reo Māori. And again, while it is not a total transliteration, in the spirit of what the language is trying to tell us, it is trying to tell us exactly what we're trying to achieve here. And with that, I just want to close my points on this.
Final two comments from Councillor McMillan and Councillor White.
I'd just like to move that we endorse the strategic direction, and bearing in mind it will go out to consultation and our community can submit on this. And I think, yeah, I'd like to move that we endorse it.
Before I take a seconder, I think it would be helpful to actually get a sense of the meeting. We're obviously quite split, and it's whether the document needs more work or we sign it off. So the two issues for me are the vision and whether or not we do want an English transliteration of the Maori version. I'm relaxed on that. So can I have an indication for those that do want an English portion of that Maori version of the vision? So those that would like English in there, could we just have a show of hands?
Or a foot.
Or a footnote. So that's 5. Those that don't, that's 5.
What's Toy?
And toys online.
And Toy, I have to take Toy as
Councillor, it's not yet
right. I think we will leave it as is, as a recognition. As far as the Chakuma statement, that has not got an English translation, and I personally believe that it needs one. So can I have a show of hands, those that would seek an English translation of that outcome?
It's a footnote.
Well, I think it actually needs its own heading in English. 5, and those that don't. So that means that we do.
Sorry, Jane.
On
Page 63.
On page 63, we have an outcome that doesn't have an English title, it has only the Maori title. And that's all I'm seeking, is that we have some English words in that. Otherwise, people are not going to know, most people that don't speak Te Reo are not going to know what it means.
So just so that we can move on, can someone propose what that wording would actually be, so we can tick it off today and forget it and move on?
I was suggesting partnership with Maori, but that was just that was because of the words underneath it.
That's not having religion.
It's a pathway to excellence. That's what the other part is.
That's a simple explanation.
Pathway to excellence.
So,
You know, the reality, Madam Chair, because I asked if I could speak, my final comment on this one here, is the fact that if people have issues with particular, descriptors in whatever we do in the reo or whatever, then we should have a process that they can be answered. And without getting into the full book of detail, if somebody's got a question, we should be in a position to be able to answer to them what it means. And I'm not saying, and that just alleviates the need for going through the whole damn document, explaining every damn word in detail. Kia ora.
Okay, on page 57, it's just been pointed out to me that there has been given a translation, The Pursuit of Excellence. So maybe it was overlooked that it wasn't actually written in English.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say.
Yeah.
We could just remove Te Arawhautanga from that English side and just put an English.
And that's what I'm seeking.
Okay, cool.
All right. Move. We have a mover. Can I have a seconder? Oh, Councillor Thompson, are you happy to second?
Yes.
And for the other recommendations as well, you both put in all of those motions. So I'll put that motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. The next item is our annual plan deliberations on public transport reprioritisation, and have we got Mike Seaborn? Online. Okay, thank you all, Kamara, and thank you. We will look forward to hearing from you.
Madam Chair, I would like to move the recommendations contained in the report.
Second.
Have we not got additional information for public transport?
It's been done to death. Quite me.
So through you, Chair, just recognising that you've moved it, there was an email to you last night with some very good news that you might not have picked up from Kamaran. It was sent at 7:25, and staff have been able to assess the impact of the budget that was announced last week. That budget announcement included free public transport for children under the age of 13 and half price for people under the age of 25. This program is to begin from the 1st of July 2023. The implications of this announcement for this council is that it signals an additional $2 million of funding for the public transport activity effective from 1 July 2023. An option to apply this funding to the draft annual plan will be presented by staff today. If you choose this option, it will mean that you will have essentially be able to move away from that negative forecast balance for the Tauranga Public Transport Reserve. In addition, you'll be able to decrease the public transport targeted rate for Tauranga to 4.9%, which translates to $26.92 per rating unit. And in addition to that, you can also reduce your total real rates revenue increase to 4%. So it was a significant budget announcement, which has very good implications for this region, and staff can go through that if you would so like now.
We've got comments from Councillor Shirley and Councillor von Dales.
I just make a point, when we refer to it, we should stress, because I disagree fundamentally with it being free. It's free to use it. Nothing's free. It's a question of how you pay for it, when you pay for it, and who pays for it. So let's be quite clear that it's free to use it, not free public transport.
Yeah, look, I support this recommendation, but recognise, please, that this is not going to be straightforward for our staff to implement, because you're changing the age. You bring it from all school children, the government one brings it down to 13, and so somehow we have to find a mechanism to actually measure that, and then it goes up to 25.5 years. So it is complex, but the outcome as staff have done on the financials looks good, but it won't be easy to actually implement by the July date that they expect. So you can expect an increased budget in the consultancy to work out that, to get it to implement. That's all. But in principle, yes, absolutely.
Councillor McMillan and Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, I think Councillor von Dalton has pretty much answered it, because I heard discussion about that yesterday, the complexity of transitioning to the new government announcement, budget announcement. So I suppose, I fully support it, and I'm just wondering about the budget for that transitioning, because I understand it takes a bit of resource, and is that part of the saving needed for that resource to transition us into that space?
Is there somebody that can answer that question?
Through you, Madam Chair.
Yes.
The answer to the question is yes, we can. We have budget allowance to make that transition, and we're working with Waka Kotahi on the timeline for that and the complexities in that transition. And we'll have a plan fairly soon around that.
Councillor Thompson, then Councillor Houston.
We're swimming like kawaii today, aren't we? I just want to be very, very clear that if the council resolves as per our recommendation, that this does not mean that we are not still going to have the debate and the discussion around providing all school children, as we currently do, with free fares, because there's obviously a gap between 13-year-olds and what we currently fund. So I just want to be crystal clear that in passing this, we're still going to have that debate and discussion at an appropriate time.
Absolutely. It needs to be as part of your long-term plan. So this is for your annual plan, but in your long-term plan, there is absolute need to look at in terms of whether it's affordable for ratepayers to continue with free fares for all school children in cities.
Councillor Houston.
Madam Chair, it's to the Chief Executive in terms of what we just heard as a preamble to this discussion, should we be in fact be making an additional recommendation in reference to the 2023 budget announcements with regards to public transport funding and the recommendations in light of what we've heard in the last 12 hours?
Yes,
I think it would be
absolutely.
appropriate.
Yes.
I'm guided by you.
Yes. So just talking with the chair, the change to the recommendations on page 67 is that you confirm the funding for the following items and not the reprioritisation. And a further to note the additional 2 million in funding for the public transport activity that was announced in the budget on the 18th of May.
I'm prepared to accept an amendment to our recommendation.
Happy to second that. That was the other car wire.
Thank you, councillors. Are there any other questions, or have staff any other points that they wish to make before I put the motion? Nope. Looks like everybody's happy. I'll put that motion.
Well done.
All those in favour? Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Our next item is on page 72. That's our service improvement proposal reprioritisation. So Namuta and Antoine, thank you. Welcome to the table.
Councillors. We are on page 72 of your agenda, and Antoinette and I are happy to talk to any questions you may have in terms of the spatial planning item. Oh, sorry, Antoinette, did you want to provide an overview?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could just flesh it out a little bit, please.
Sure. So you'll recall in the last long-term plan workshop, in terms of the spatial planning, you'll recall 2 long-term planning workshops ago, we proposed a $1 million budget for this item. We came back, you asked us to reduce that, we reduced that to 700K in the last workshop. You asked us to go away and look at what funds we could redistribute across I've looked across my group to see how we could fund this work, and we've now reduced that to 500,000. The reason, just as a reminder, in terms of funding that this goes towards, it's really to help support the overarching umbrella is spatial planning. This goes to support our work with our partners, Rotorua Lakes Council, in the finalisation of their future development strategy and kicking off their implementation plan as a result of their future development strategy and the technical work that goes behind in supporting that. It goes towards supporting the Eastern Bay Spatial Plan as a partner as well. In that process, we're currently in stage 1. We'll be shifting into stage 2 shortly, and the technical work and support that provides. You'll be aware we're working with our partners in developing that base information for the regional spatial strategy. Our partners have asked us to do a regional profile, so you'll see funding in there as part of that as well as just setting that sort of foundation for future spatial planning direction that we're likely to get, and the thinking that needs to go supporting that. Anton, did you have anything else you wanted to add? Or?
As you know, there's a lot of uncertainty in the system in terms of what's coming up, and so working with partners on the ground, and we're sharing that uncertainty together. And so there's some things we can get on with in terms of base information, and that's linking to also having a regional perspective, but also having that acumen locally and having local people share what their aspirations are. I think puts us in a really good, strong position for later on when we're developing the regional spatial strategy, having that confidence it's linked to place and people in the communities.
And this is totally outside of smart growth. It talks to it, but it's not. That money doesn't go into any of smart growth.
Yeah. So the funding and the recommendation talks about the reprioritisation of the spatial planning budget. So smart growth does come under the spatial planning umbrella, but the reprioritisation of funding is specifically for Rotorua, Eastern Bay, as well as some base foundational work.
And there's certainly an equity exercise we've gone through around Smart growth is a very mature strategy. It's been going for a couple of decades now. Eastern Bay and Wilton are just on their journey, so that this is an investment in the future in those areas.
Laura.
I've got councillor Bondados and councillor Winters and then councillor White.
Yeah, Madam Chair, we had quite a discussion of this in the last 2 days, both at the joint PT committee and at the workshop for PT across the region yesterday. And the most eloquent person who spoke on this, of course, was Councillor Thompson, who was absolutely adamant and supported unanimously, I think, that we cannot do spatial planning without taking a very integrated approach that includes all forms of transport, but and specifically PT, public transport as well, but it's also all forms of transport. And as such, we must make sure that we've got a budget allocation that allows public transport and transport in across the region in totem to be included in spatial planning, the spatial planning exercise. It's absolutely integral and in our view can't be achieved without that input, and we must be able to find a way to finance it so that we're getting the required outcome. Thank you.
You're not suggesting any change to the recommendations? No, thank you. Councillor Winters?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'm not sure the recommendations are correct, because in the executive summary, it talks about the fourth bullet point, Rotorua transport, Rotorua refresh. But in the recommendations, there's nothing regarding the Rotorua refresh. And if I go to page 76, there's approved service improvement proposals. There's some OPEX to be put there for Rotorua. We've talked about it in the workshop, but it hasn't been relocated into the recommendations. That part 3 is missing from the recommendations. We've approved it in the workshop, so I'm not sure why it's not being reaffirmed today.
So through you, Chair, that's already in the budgets. So at that February workshop, you agreed to those reprioritisations to go straight through. But
yeah, but we can't make decisions at workshops.
So when you look at that financial overview, the further agenda items, that's already been picked up. So at that February workshop, you asked for more information on spatial planning, catchments, coast care, rivers and drainages, making room for the river, and the safeguarding our stock banks. But you gave direction for those two to be included in the budgets, and they have been.
Oh, so we've made that decision.
Yes. Yeah. Sweet. We've given that direction already. Yes.
So we have councillor White, councillor Thompson and councillor McMillan.
Yeah, kia ora korua. In the redistribution, reprioritisation, what parts of the spatial planning area or the sector or your work brief have you reduced, and are there any impacts in that reduction?
We've reduced across all of those program areas. So there's an equality exercise as well as an equity one, particularly taking to, as I said previously, taking into account smart growth has received a lion's share of funding in the past. So it's equally across all of those.
So perhaps to add further to that, so previously we came to you with a budget of 150,000 for Rotorua Lakes and the support there. So we've reduced that to 100,000. For the Eastern Bay, we had proposed 350,000 and we've reduced that to 250,000. And for the regional spatial strategy work, there was about 200,000 there. We've reduced that to 150,000. And that's as per the notes of the workshop and the guidance you gave at the workshop, which was the question was put to us then as to how we might reduce the budget to make it 500,000, and Stas just reaffirmed there that we would take an approach of making reductions across all of those activities.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just two issues. A matter arising from that particular question from Councillor White. My understanding is the question really was what won't be done.
So through the chair, in terms of that, that reduces our grants, if you like. As part of Smart Growth, we are a partner and we have a proportion of funding that we provide as a partner to the project, and that gets distributed across a number of activities. Those activities include, so there's a project management and engagement, a specialist consultant, collateral, specialist studies.
I guess the point, Madam Chair and Chief Executive and Muta, is that this is critical work, and it would be unfortunate if it was not resourced so that the really good outcomes could be achieved. And I'm going to make a very broad segue into the item around the $183,000, because if you would indulge me, Madam Chair, the way I'm reading the amended recommendation is that we are being suggested to provide 183, but all the other TLAs are being suggested that they contribute as well. So will they be contributing 183 each? If so, that is the most extraordinarily well-resourced independent secretariat that I've ever met in my entire life. So all I'm really saying is that I really do hope that we're going to resource spatial planning for Rotorua Lakes and the Eastern Bay really well. So that was my first point. And my second point was, I've totally forgotten now. I'm having another senior moment, so forgive me.
Yes.
If I may, you're in the position where you're trying to put in place resources for change that hasn't yet happened. So in terms of the government passing the Strategic Planning Act and the National Built Environment Act, it will be very clear after that exactly what is required for this region. So as an example, we are still waiting for direction in terms of whether Bay of Plenty will be a first tranche region in terms of those reforms. So you are trying to get ahead of that by putting in funding for foundational research and also to support Eastern Bay and Rotorua to do their spatial planning. I do expect in your long-term plan we will have much more certainty in terms of what is required for this region. And it also may be once that legislation is passed, we might have to come back to you within the year.
No, it'll be fine.
In terms of what is required there as well. So you're trying to preempt it with this funding, but until that legislation is passed, it's not entirely clear just what is required. In addition to that, it also is for that independent secretariat for the Mayoral Forum in terms of what is required regionally to support regional planning and what is the role of the Mayoral Forum in that.
Thank you. And if I may just, sorry, if Councillor McMillan, I know I'm cutting you off, but I've suddenly recalled what my senior moment had me not recall, and that was in relation to Councillor von Dadelson's point at yesterday's workshop. What staff indicated was that they only had limited capacity to contribute to spatial planning, and we were very clear that they must be fully resourced to be able to, otherwise you can forget robust integrated planning. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Just before I invite Councillor McMillan to speak, if just thinking about the paper that's coming, if other TLAs contribute to the Secretariat, then I would expect the 183,000 to decrease. Is that the case? No, it was raised, so I just want to get that clarified.
Absolutely, and also it would reduce if and when the Smart Growth budget is clear to you in terms of that 182,000 as well. It's subject to two things, which we can talk about at that agenda item.
So I just want to make sure that we've got flexibility, that should not all of that money be required for the Secretariat, then that money is released back into spatial planning. That was my point.
Yes.
Through the chair, Councillor Eaty has joined us online.
Thank you. Councillor McMillan.
Different subject, but this is around the 2.2 item. just the line that says the additional 75,000 is funded through unallocated volunteer funding, and the likelihood that an additional priority biodiversity site will not proceed. Maybe a question for Chris, or can someone talk to that?
Yes, I'm sorry, I don't know the detail on the priority site that won't proceed, but I'm assuming that that's a planned site. I can find out for you after the meeting if you like.
Thank you.
Any further comments or questions, councillors? If not, we have a motion. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Thank you, councillor White and councillor McMillan. I'm going to put that motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against, carried. Carried. I think it might be morning tea, is it?
Can we get more to now if you like?
I think we'll break for morning tea. No, I think we'll move on. Sorry. Sorry. Good morning tea, everyone. Yes. Can we please resume at 11:45? Thank you.
Most
Welcome back to the resumption of our meeting. We'll now resume our meeting. Councillors, we do have a presentation that we think it would be useful for you to see, just so that you're absolutely clear about the implications of the government budget announcement on public transport. So we've arranged for this presentation to be shown to you now. So Kamaran, thank you.
Dear councillors, this particular presentation is essentially providing a quick summary for councillors of an overview of the financial overview report and the key elements of the budget build-up to the last set of numbers prior to the implications of the budget announcement on the public transport targeted rate. So I just want to quickly take councillors through what the latest set of numbers were and how the budget announcement affects those numbers as summarised by the Chief Executive in the earlier agenda item. So the draft annual plan, as per the paper in the agenda, essentially sets out operating spend of 186 million, capex at 30 million, and that translates to total real rates revenue increase of 5.2%, essentially made up of the general rates real increase of 5% and targeted rates increase of 5.4%. So this is all prior to the budget announcement implications, which I will cover off in a subsequent slide. Some key assumptions to note: inflation is currently at 6.7% factored into those numbers. The additional Quayside dividend of 2.6 million over what was signalled in the annual plan for this year, staff inflation, and also the service improvement proposals content, which has been covered off in the early agenda item. So this table essentially just gives you a snapshot of the general rates implications and what you've seen earlier and to where we are now as per the paper and the agenda. So the LTP forecast, so you've got two columns, LTP year 2, LTP year 3. The LTP year 2 is essentially this financial year and this annual plan. And year 3 is the annual plan that you currently have in front of you for consideration and we'll come back to you for adoption in June. So the LTP forecast increase for year 2 was 3% and the annual plan was the same. The annual plan so the year 3 for next year was signalled in the LTP at 3%. So the second row, the annual plan 22-23, which is this annual plan for this financial year, was at 5.8%, while the LTP was signalled at 3.3%. The first workshop for the annual plan for next year is, as you would recall, 5.1% for workshop 1 and 5% for the last workshop that you had, and remains unchanged in terms of the paper that you have in front of you after taking into account the service improvement proposals, reprioritisation, and essentially those elements that were all covered off in the last workshop. It's important to note real rates increase definition again is excluding inflation and growth, and that's essentially the numbers you're seeing on the table in front of you.
Just pause for a minute.
Can I just clarify a point there, please? We know that we've got the rates 5%, and then with inflation at 6.2. What number do you allow for growth?
1.2%. So that page essentially summarizes your general rate implications, your targeted rate implications. So there's a process we just want council to be aware of that we've applied since the last workshop, and it's typically applied at this point in time for annual plans. And that's the targeted rates smoothing process, where we utilize targeted rates reserves to smooth rating impacts for for the targeted rates. So essentially, the LTP forecast shows what the LTP had forecast for each of the different years for the targeted rates, and the real rates for the annual plan as it stands for this financial year is at 2%. Targeted rates increases that were signaled to you at earlier workshops, or the last workshop, was 12.3% for targeted rates, and that was prior to applying any smoothing. So that was just purely a full targeted rate impact after having looked at the reserves and applying some of those reserves against the targeted rates following the last workshop. That would have given you an 8.1% increase. Having reviewed the budgets since then and taking into account some additional external funding that have come in from Crown Infrastructure Partners that has helped reduce that rate in relation to the river schemes, that's pre-smoothed rates is now sitting at 6.6% per the paper. And once the smoothing was applied in terms of utilizing the respective targeted reserves, that's reduced to 5.4%. So that's essentially the baseline targeted rates increase, real rates increase, before taking into account any of the additional funding from the government announcement, which I'll cover off shortly. So the slide also just gives you a bit of an overview of the methodology that's applied in to take into account the targeted, the smoothed impact of 5.4% for targeted rates. And so essentially, if a targeted rate had a real rates increase and it had an estimated positive reserve balance, that reserve balance was used to bring the real rate, to reduce the real rate increase down to 0%. And if a targeted rate had a real rate decrease, we essentially increased that rate to bring it back to zero. And that's to create rating stability for ratepayers, so we don't have fluctuations in rates across various years. Also to bear in mind that the total targeted rates is made up of a mixture of different types of rates. So there's different rates, rate increase for the different areas. So the total is not a flat rate across all of the different areas. So it's made up of a composite of different rates. So just so you appreciate the differences between the rates for each area versus the total rates increase.
Okay. I'm just a little bit confused there. If a targeted rate has a real rate decrease, then it's targeted at zero, which is not a decrease.
It's been increased to zero, yes.
So I'm missing something here. If it's a targeted rate decrease, then it's less than zero.
Yes. So
zero is not a decrease, it's a stable.
Yeah, correct.
So what you're saying is you're holding them at the previous rate.
And that's to keep that rating stability, to ensure that we don't have major fluctuations for ratepayers while we deliver on the program that underpins those rates. Just to give you a bit of an overview of the individual scheme impacts or target rate impacts, Carla will just take you through how that methodology is applied for some of the key targeted rate areas and what that means in terms of the reserve implications and the dollar value of those rate increases or rate adjustments.
Morning, councillors. The purpose of this slide is really just to illustrate the impact of our applied targeted rates smoothing approach. To note, this is based on the principles that Kumaran just touched on in his previous slide. So in supplement to this slide, I want to draw elected members' attention to page 85 of the agenda. So Appendix 2 sets out a targeted rates smoothing table. This is a tabular summary of all our main targeted rates, pre and post smoothing, and that's just based in accordance with the principles which Kumaran has just touched on. So if we look on the slide and use Kaituna River Scheme as an example, by applying our smoothing principles, we've effectively utilize, draw down the reserve balance from 113,000 to 0. What that does, it has an impact on our real targeted rate increase. So post smoothing, the increase is 13.4%, whereas pre-smoothing it was 18.1%. So the dollar impact, which is probably relevant in this instance, is post smoothing it has got an impact of $17.22 per ratepayer, whereas before smoothing it was $21.66, just to give a dollar value comparison. Then in terms of Tauranga PT, Kumar will touch on that later in his presentation. That's the aspects that's changed this morning, but largely as it stands currently, Tauranga PT has got a reserve deficit of 0.5 million. We've increased the targeted rates from 11.9 to 14.2. So that's a real targeted rates increase of 12.1. Again, just change that's in a little bit more detail later on. Then also in regards to Whakatane public transport targeted rate, currently a 0.1 reserve deficit. This targeted rate through our principles can't be smooth because there's no reserves to apply against the smoothing principles. The impact it does have is a 24.9 real rates increase from our revenue last year to next year. If you translate that to dollar impact, that's $8.74 increase per rating unit.
So just to summarize the target rates impact, essentially we're looking at total net target rates applied, or reserves applied for smoothing of 0.4 million. Because that has the impact of reducing your total target rates revenue, that does increase council's deficit from 0.4 million from 7.4 to 7.8 million. And bear in mind, this is again all prior to applying the $2 million extra funding, which I'll touch on shortly. Total target rates reserve at the end of the annual plan period is envisaged to be around 6.7 million. The target rates reserves that are in deficit will be an item that we will consider as part of the financial strategy discussions for the LTP. So I'll skip that slide because the Chief Executive had covered that off in detail earlier today. So essentially, just to reconfirm the message earlier, the option that was signaled in the email I sent last night is essentially covered in this slide in terms of how the 2 million could be applied for the annual plan. And the way this option essentially indicates that if the 2 million is applied in this particular way, it would result in the fare revenue reducing by 0.6 million. Your total target rates revenue take would reduce by 0.9 million, and the PT reserve deficit, which Carlo highlighted in the previous slide, would be 0. And by applying it that way, your Tauranga public transport rate would be 4.9% real rates increase, which translates to $26.92 per rating unit, as opposed to $45 highlighted in the earlier slide. So the adjusted rates impact then reduces your total real rates revenue increase down to 4%, and that's made up of your general rates increase at 5%, which remains unchanged from previous workshops and from the paper in front of you. And your target rates, total rates increase would now reduce to 3% from the number signaled in the earlier slide. So that's to just reconfirm and give you more of an appreciation of two key elements. One is the rates, the target rate smoothing methodology that's been applied to get to the baseline numbers that's in the paper and the agenda. but also to give you an appreciation of how the $2 million additional funding is applied and how that changes the headline numbers that are contained in the agenda paper.
Thank you, Kamaran. I've got a question from Councillor Winters.
Kamaran, just go back one slide, please. It's just the deficit that you're talking about, PT reserve replenishment of $500,000. So would the Crown allow us to do that, to backdate a deficit using funds carried forward? Because it seems to me that they're starting a new fair structure, and we're taking $500,000 to reduce the deficit. Would they allow us to do that? That's a question, because I wouldn't, if I was the Crown.
There's, to my knowledge at this stage, given the information is quite preliminary from government, there's no criteria that's been specified in regards to that. But the reserve is purely a reaction to the operational requirements and spending of the activity, and this is just bringing that into balance, but it's not changing the program in any way.
Could I ask a question? I understood that we were using some of the regional funds to fund some of the business cases from in the PT activities, so that is not affecting our use of the regional fund at all.
No impact on that at all.
Any questions, councillors? Very clear.
So essentially, this slide is just to reconfirm the messages signaled by the Chief Executive earlier on, and essentially seeking council direction as to this option being modelled and essentially put into the financials for what will be brought to council in late June for adoption.
Does this need a further resolution in our financial overview and deliberations recommendations?
So through you, Chair, in the paper on PT, you already amended those recommendations to note this budget increase, and you also amended the recommendation in terms of no need to reprioritise now because of this funding. So for completeness, I think we include another recommendation here in terms of that you note the implications of the recent public transport announcement on the targeted rate and general real rates increases. Go to the next slide, Kamara. Of being the total real rates revenue increased to 4%.
So moved.
Oh, just the reduction in the Tauranga targeted rate for transport, is it not applied right across the Bay of Plenty?
Yes, you are correct, and but given that 80 to 90% of the funding is the public transport affects Tauranga, we've showcased that. There may be reductions in Rotorua and Whakatane as well, which we will highlight in June, but 100% of it is focused on Tauranga.
Thank you. We've got to move that.
Just making sure we don't miss out, Madam Chair.
Second.
Moved Councillor Thompson, second Councillor Thurston. Before I put that motion, unless we have any other questions or comments, I'd just like to clarify that the River Scheme Advisory Groups have endorsed the programs in each of their activities. Yes, okay. All right, I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Yes, sorry. We just wanted to have just a look at the communications slide. Thank you. Just for completeness, councillors, if you just note this, will you talk to this?
Yes, you've given us direction and been very clear in terms of the need to communicate this annual plan, And also, in conjunction with that, early thinking on your long-term plan strategic direction. So at the last two workshops, you've provided us with direction, and this is summarising what we intend to do in terms of your direction to date.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any comments? No?
No.
All right, we'll move on. Our next item is the agenda report on page 88, which is the Mayoral Forum Independent Secretariat paper. So Fiona, I think you and Olive will deal with this. Thank you.
So, oh, do you want to go? Yes, all right. So, councillors, we are seeking your direction in terms of reallocating $183,000 that would be otherwise part of the council's smart growth contribution to fund the independent secretariat for the Bay of Plenty Mayoral Forum. I have also talked to Smart Growth about this, and what we would like to do is amend that recommendation in terms of ensuring that if there is funding required for Smart Growth, that can take priority in terms of this 183,000, and also that other councils are asked to support the costs of the secretariat. So that is the proposed amendment on the table. And the reason why this is coming to you now is you will be aware that Smart Growth has not spent its budget over the last 2 years. That is one of the key reasons for that has been the impact of COVID, and that they haven't been able to do the engagement that they would have wanted to. And so there is quite a large continued contribution to the Smart Growth budget that is being carried forward for a number of years. The Regional Council's contribution to that carry forward is $183,000. So that's the reason why it's 183 and coming from Smart Growth. However, the Smart Growth budget for 23-24 has not yet been developed or approved. So this is why the revised recommendation as it is, that if it's not required by Smart Growth, and depending on the contribution from other councils, the direction we're seeking is for you to reallocate $183,000 towards that independent secretariat for the Mayoral Forum. By the time you approve your annual plan, we will have information on both the Smart Growth budget and also the contribution from other councils. So this is signalling a direction at this point in time.
We've got Councillor Bondaros and then Councillor Thompson and Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We had a presentation 2 days ago from TSP, an update, and what highlighted to me out of that presentation was that we are forever looking for getting consultants to write new reports about what they can do in our sub-region, blah, blah, blah. And they don't use reports from that have previously been done. They're working on an ad hoc basis and not in a collaborative intra-regional council basis. So I have a real query on funding these sort of issues, and I think that's been a fault at Smart Growth. We've spent 2 decades on writing reports and doing things, and we've got ourselves bogged down, and we have to then have an AFTI, and then we have a TSP, and then we're back, it's building back. But there's so much when it comes to decarbonisation and reports as to whether we should be going for EVs or hydrogen or whatever. We shouldn't be doing that, in my view, as a regional, as a Bay of Plenty regional council, but we should be collaborating with our partners to do it much more efficiently, because yes, there's nuances to individual areas on certain things, but generally it's the same data, and yet we're paying these consultants who seem to be, spending more and more of our money without getting out as a council. Where it comes to this, you say, well, we didn't spend 183,000, so we won't do a mayoral forum. Well, I haven't seen any evidence yet of what value you're going to get out of spending 183,000 of this council's money on a mayoral forum. And if I look at the history of mayoral forums, it's been relatively abysmal on an outcomes base. And yes, we want to get our mayoral forums to be working collaboratively. It's really important. We all work together. So I'm in favour of mayoral forums, but I need the evidence that it's going to be outcomes based, not just report writing. So before I can support any money going to mayoral forums, I want to see that and know that we're getting value for money and we've got our thumb on efficiency and effectiveness.
So I'll invite the Chief Executive to respond.
Yes, the mayors and chairs of the mayoral forum are really focused on working better together, and so they have looked at the model of Canterbury and looked at what worked well there in terms of having an agreed work program and an independent secretariat to support that work program. At the last mayoral forum meeting, they are very focused on two key aspects at the moment. One is the three waters and actually making sure that this region is ready to implement the three waters and actually looking at how we can do that well together. The other key aspect that the mayoral forum is looking at, as this council is in terms of how do we get ready for regional spatial planning? How do we get ready for implementing that Strategic Planning Act in particular that is expected to go through the House before the election? So this funding would support a work program of the mayoral forum. It would be on particular pieces of work in regards to regional spatial planning and three waters. It is not the same as perhaps the evidential base that's required for things like future development strategies that's been happening at that sub-regional spatial planning level. And the key thing, again, is this is trying to preempt the need for this funding. This funding would only be available if it's not required by smart growth at this point in time. And then the mayoral forum also needs to consider what contributions other councils would make to an independent secretariat. But it really is about making that mayoral forum work better by giving it some ability to have advice going through to it. And we've looked at the Canterbury model to see how that worked well.
Can I just, the problem I see is smart growth started with wonderful intentions back in 2003, and it lost focus over the years. And we asked, as a 42% funder, this regional council, towards smart growth. We continually asked over the last 4 or 5 years for some both efficiency and effectiveness, but also for even a budget, so that we knew what was actually being spent. And we were sidelined for a long period of time, and I'm not convinced that. I just can't see what this 183,000 is actually going to achieve in the short term. You say three waters. We've got an opposition that says that if they come into power, the first thing they will do is to repeal three waters. Now I don't know what we haven't had detail on what they'll replace it with, so that doesn't. That's only a part of the story. That might just be a headline, but so for the mayoral forum to rush ahead and spend a lot of money on three waters right now. The central government, this government, say they're going to have the legislation all done, but they've actually delayed the starting date to 27, I think it is, rather than 25. So we have got time, and this looks like pork barrel politics to me, and that we're just going to be pumping money that is that doesn't have a clear definition of what we're going to get out of it. And so, yeah, I'm just struggling personally. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Now, the batting order is Councillor Millen, Councillor Scott, Councillor Campbell and Councillor Shirley. Did I miss anybody? Thompson and Winters, thank you. Councillor McMillan.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm just wondering if someone can just touch on the governance issues. Issues is quite I suppose, ambiguous but potentially negative word. So, yeah, can someone just summarise what the governance issues are currently?
Do you know what you're referring to, Councillor?
It's in the executive summary, page 88.
So that is referring to both in terms of what is required from this region in terms of regional planning committees in the future, in terms of the strategic planning reforms, and also in terms of Three Waters, what is required in terms of the governance. Those two are not yet clear, and so it's about supporting the mayoral form.
The transitioning,
yes,
as opposed to clashes in governance.
Oh,
it's about
absolutely.
transitioning through the reforms and the governance of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Both
yeah.
of
I just
those
wanted to
reforms
clarify that.
require regional governance entities that are not yet established, and we do not yet know how they will be established.
Yeah, gotcha. Thanks. I thought it might be, but I just wanted to clarify.
Thank you, Councillor Scott.
Yeah, I support a lot of what Councillor Von Daddelson was saying. We need a budget. At the moment, I'm concerned that the reason why it's 183,000 is because that's what was allocated somewhere else, and so we're pulling that out of the air. We don't have it. We have a deficit budget, so it's not money that's there. It's the equivalent of me buying 3 extra shirts because they're on sale and saving money. But in fact, I've spent more. So I would encourage discipline, and one way of encouraging discipline is by saying, well, where is that 183 coming from? It's coming from borrowing, effectively. We don't know what it's going to be spent on. We're getting ahead of the program, in particular with Three Waters. It's, even if it goes through, there's enough time afterwards to be dealing when we know what is going to go through. And the third point, the last point is, we would have been doing planning internally anyway in some of these things. So that part of our budget, which we would have been using to do that in any case, should be coming back into the pot as well, I would have thought.
Councillor Campbell, thank you.
My turn, sir. Good. Okay, yes, Chair, look, through you, I'm aghast that the Mayoral Forum has come and asked for $183,000. I take exception to Councillor Von Dellison's assumption that the Mayoral Forum didn't work. It's only because he wasn't watching it right over the last 20 odd years that I know that I've been on it, because it did have some very successful things, especially for your city. I'll take the World Highway for a start, and the Eastern Bypass. If it wasn't for that today, a couple of councillors would have taken probably 3.5 hours to get here this morning instead of 1 3/4 hours. Likewise for myself. Bit different for somebody who's got a Vespa that just runs a couple of 100 metres down the road. But in saying that, the other one is the weather radar, which was a very successful thing that we've put on too. Going from there though, what really concerns me is that this has come onto the table now. When Rotorua District Council, or Rotorua Lakes Council, actually fitted the bill for many, many years, and I would have thought that it would have, if they wanted to streamline it a little bit, they could all pay a little bit towards it and make it work. I'm aghast, to be honest, and it's going to be interesting to see what Councillor Winters says about this, because we had a great secretariat in those days. When it first started, it was Arnold Dutoit. Very matter of fact, got everything done, reasonably well, I think. And so
I would be voting against this all the way down the line. I'm sorry. I just cannot see the reason why the Mayoral Forum would be coming to the regional council, and I'm not even sure how it even got on the agenda, to be honest. I'd like to know. Thank you.
Executive.
Yes, so in November last year, the mayors and chairs got together and they decided that they wanted to work in a different way, and that's where this came from. Just to be clear, this is not about the administration of the Mayoral Forum. The administration of the Mayoral Forum is actually done by Bay Plenty Regional Council now. It was done in the last triennial. Previous to that, it was Rover Relays Council. This is about a secretariat that can help with research and providing papers to the Mayoral Forum on things like Three Waters governance and how the Mayoral Forum, does the Mayoral Forum have a role in terms of future regional planning committees? So that is what the intention of the funding is for.
Right. Have your questions been answered?
No.
I think we have Councillor Shirley now.
I have similar feelings and probably stronger than Councillor Alderson Scott and our friend from Kawerau. It comes back to, I have no doubt that the Mayoral Forum is a very important body. It comes back to governance and operations. So they have the governance there with the mayors, supported by the chief executive, very important. And that's a question of how you do the secretariat or the administrative. And I think it's very dangerous to sort of start splitting the administrative into sort of a secretariat versus some sort of consultancy, some independent body. These bodies tend to become self-perpetuating and they're very hard to close down once you get them. And it seems that they'll just be doing sort of consultants work in terms of providing reports like the things that were outlined. So it makes me very nervous. I would have thought, with goodwill amongst the governance bodies, the mayors around the respective bodies, supported by their executives, if they can't, from a governance point of view, give a clear direction to the collective resource that we have in all of those administrative blocks to provide those services, then there's something seriously wrong. And there's enough capacity there existing in those support services to do this job, to create another institution that will become self-perpetuating with another funding stream. I just think I can't see the case for that. So that's my sort of general concern. The other two questions I have is, I said that we were going to ask the other councils if they would contribute. This is towards 183,000. Have they been sounded out, is my question, because once they know it's been funded, what's the chance of actually having them contribute? Not very high, I would suggest. So it's a question of, have they been sounded out at this stage? That's my first question. And the second one was with regard to well, that's their appetite to contribute. With smart growth itself, the fact that we haven't got a budget was like pulling hen's teeth trying to get the budget out of them. And to say that we'll only contribute that if they can't use the money that's already there, I think we know the answer to that one. It won't be there. So I just sort of seek further clarification on the probability and likelihood of those two triggers. A, will smart growth actually been able to use its surplus that it's accumulated because of COVID? Big ask. And secondly, what's the appetite? Have we sounded out the appetite from the other councils to contribute part of that 183,000?
So in response to that question, yes, and certainly TCC has signalled that they would like to contribute. There was a full set of papers to the last Mayoral Forum in terms of the rationale why an independent secretariat might be worthwhile to consider now. The Mayoral Forum determined that they wanted to confirm their work programme first and then see if an independent secretariat was required. So that is why this is here now. In terms of the smart growth budget, you will be aware that it currently has that large carry forward surplus. Smart growth budget is a very detailed budget, and it includes, when it is developed and approved, includes funding such as for the next year in terms of completing the future development strategy. So it will include all the costs in terms of the consultation on that future development strategy, the hearings process. So we're just in a position where that hasn't been developed or approved now, hence, but it is a detailed budget and it does show the outputs that are funded through that.
Could I just reply? From what I understand then is that the Mayor's Forum actually haven't decided yet whether they need it. So I think it's very premature for us to be approving it until they've had that think and had that consideration. And that's when we should consider whether we fund it, not in advance of them actually having decided whether they need it.
I think that is a wise sentiment. The issue that you have is that you're developing your annual plan now. That decision will be made potentially in October or November, and there'll be no funding available for an independent secretariat at that point in time. Hence why it's with you now.
We have Councillor Thompson, Councillor Winters, Councillor White and Councillor McDonald. Thank you.
Ditto to what everyone else has said. One of the things that I'm concerned about is that I'm not clear on the rationale nor on the role. The simple fact that a paper went up to the last mayoral forum really indicates my core problem with this, and this is the layering of governance within local government. And so what effectively, regional spatial planning, we should, as the governing body of this organisation, be having very in-depth discussions around how that might all work and come to pass without, and it just seems to me that we're now creating the mayoral forum to have these discussions, which takes away, I think, from some of our sovereignty. And that has really concerned me. It's a trend that I've seen over the last 3 years in particular, and I'm gravely concerned about it. I understand the issue around what the Chief Executive has just said, and I would suggest that we maybe put some contingency funding aside, but certainly not in the order of the $183,000. So I'd be in favour of setting aside, subject to us further agreeing the rationale and role for this particular body, some money for it. But I'm really with Councillor Shirley to think that within 8 local authorities we can't muster the capacity and capability to provide the kind of support that the mayoral forum beggars belief, in my view. So that's my thinking.
Councillor Winters.
I think there's a bit of a theme coming out here today, Madam Chair. Before I get into the discussion on number 2, I just also want to comment, like Councillor Campbell, on some of the Councillor Von Danielson's abysmal performance of previous mayoral forums. We got the rain radar for the Bay of Plenty. What a huge piece of infrastructure to see weather bombs coming in and being able to give our civil defence emergency management team some really good tools in the toolbox for that. The mayoral forum got that underway. Similarly, the Tauranga Eastern Link, as was mentioned by Councillor Campbell, $500 million piece of infrastructure. If the mayors of the Bay of Plenty hadn't agreed to that piece of infrastructure, it wouldn't happen. And it's good for Eastern Bay, it's good for Whakatane, it's good for Kawerau, it's good for Rotorua. So, we have done some really good things in the past, and we didn't need an independent secretary because we all got our heads around the table and said, this is what we're going to do. Go out and do it. So, I cannot agree with this number 2 today. If you've got 183,000 spare, put it back in the kitty and bring rates down by 0.5%. Simple. The mayoral forum does not need an independent secretary. If those mayoral colleagues, mayors and chairs can't get their heads around the table to sort it out themselves, then sorry, having somebody else to come in as an independent to try and oversee a decision, sorry, doesn't cut the mustard with me. If it's spare money, put it back in the kitty and bring rates down by 0.5%.
Councillor White.
Well, I can't actually report like the old boys over there have indicated on their history. I can only take it as as appropriate in their response, but the notions of abysmal performance that I've heard suggest that there is some need for serious improvement. I'm not sure that the $183,000 is going to secure that without the support of everybody else. My question really is, so what? If we said no to the $183,000, would it just resort back to business as usual, which the suggestion has been quite abysmal at the moment? What would happen?
I think the Mural Forum will tailor its work program accordingly. So it would not look for research in terms of supporting moving to that regional Three Waters governance as quickly as they can. And in terms of the just the role, if there was a role, the Mural Forum and the Regional Planning Committee, these are the sort of consequences of them not having funding. But we have come back as staff in the past within the year to ask for additional funding with the rationale that you require. So it may be that it is something that if the Mural Forum they have their work program and they can justify exactly how that funding will be used, that was something that you could consider at that point in time as an intra-year budget adjustment.
Lastly, Councillor
I'll withdraw now because most of my comments have been answered. And I share most of the sentiments. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there's a couple of steps here. We need to ascertain what the budget is for smart growth. So I don't think we can extinguish the 183,000 until we actually have the smart growth budget, and we have discussed that with our smart growth partners. Secondly, there's the issue of there is an obvious unwillingness to reallocate funding right now until either more information or the actual work program and budget for the Mural Forum has been discussed fully and brought forward. So I guess I won't put this recommendation because it's obvious that it's going to be lost. The question I have with the Chief Executive is, do we just have recommendation 1, which is to receive the report and be silent on the rest, or would you prefer another amendment to give a bit of direction?
I thank you, Chair. I think that's the best way forward. And we will seek to have that information on the smart growth budget before your approval of the annual plan at the end of June. So then you can make a decision on the 182,000. Then in addition to that, throughout the year, we will look at bringing that work program from the Mural Forum to you and any consequence or budget implications of that.
Do you want that as a recommendation?
No. We can do that, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So what we're actually dealing with right now is the recommendation to receive the report. Do I have a movement? Thank you.
So it's just number 1.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, everybody happy? I will put that motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Now we have our paper on page 91, which is the submission on the Community Initiatives Fund application, and I acknowledge Rosalie in the back. Rosalie, we are actually deliberating, and as such we're not receiving submissions. We have got your paper, but we won't be needing you to answer any questions. I think we've got sufficient information, but thank you for being here and taking interest in our process. We have Anton as well from Film New Zealand.
No, I'm just an independent filmmaker. Previously from that.
Right, okay, thank you. Well, welcome to our meeting. So, Kamaran, Oliver, you presented this paper. Thank you.
So, we received an application for the film Taking Back Our Beaches, a documentary on marina grounding, and the report outlines 3 funding options available to council as they consider this matter. So take the report as read and appreciate.
Councillor Winters.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to move 1 and 2A for this resolution. A couple of questions though. Who owns the film? Who owns the rights to it? Who's the owners?
With the leave of the meeting, I think we do need that information. If the Chief Executive can provide that.
No, I can't provide that information. No. We can follow up and get that information.
Because if we're going to be a funder of this film, quite happy to go through. I'd like us to have some, and I don't know what you call it in filming rights, but when you have on a radio, you have sound bites. Because I'd like this council to be able to use some of that film footage from what I've seen. It's very good for education purposes, for conservation purposes, environmental purposes, monitoring purposes. So I'd like us to be able to have access to that footage to use as and when required by this organisation as part of that 2A. Just have some access to it so we can use it for our own communities, if that would be okay.
Having said that we wouldn't be inviting Rosalie and anyone, I do believe this is important. So look, would you like to join us and answer?
Yeah, they can answer the question. It's just, yeah, that's all. No, come on.
Yes, we do need you to use the microphone, so thank you.
Thank you. We formed O20 LP, a limited partnership, which is just forming this week, just around the film itself, which is made up of myself, Anton, and Claire Rogers. The whole purpose of the film is actually to give something to the city. You know, it's telling our story, and all the way along we've been wanting to make sure and ensure that eventually, after it's done the festival release and cinema release, then it's eventually it ends up being used by this community for the purposes of being able to be used for community groups, for education, for helping provide resources for learning, for volunteerism and community activation, and people working together with councils and how they can do that. So we want to develop some educational resources around that, which we'd like to do by liaising with council, and don't know if the word's partnering or how we want to do that. So we're really, it's to provide a community service ultimately back to here. James Wilson has indicated that he's interested in it being part of the future museum, you know, as a arena display. Perhaps I'm not quite sure how that will look, but yeah, I mean, ultimately there is income that comes from ticket sales. 25% of that, once the net profit of that will be going back into wildlife and community organisations. So we'll probably come back to you and say, are there community groups doing coastal care that funding could go back into? So really wanting to work very collaboratively and across the community in that regard. Anton, have you got anything you want to add?
Very quickly, happy to make any film clips and resources available. You know, it's definitely part of our future, you know, desire for the project, and we'd love to partner with that.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Thompson, Councillor McDonald, Councillor Bondadosin, Councillor Shirley and Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And firstly, I'd like to second Councillor Winter's motion. And in doing so, I'd like to congratulate you, Rosalie, Claire, and Tom. What a fabulous, fabulous idea. It brought back many memories from many of us about the trauma of that time, which was quite frankly unbelievable. But thank you so much. Congratulations, and wish you well, and look forward to this being a really good part of our legacy going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Oh, no. All right, Councillor Bondadosin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a very worthwhile project. There's no two ways. I did give my interest in it, and then I was interviewed for the film, and I support the film. My concern is that, and I thought we originally had given 7,000, but it looks at the budget that we only gave 2,000 initially. It's the level of 50,000 for this organisation to come in at this stage, and that is a big contribution considering where we are with our ratepayers and going through our annual plan and budget rate setting that we're doing at the moment. So I have concerns about the amount of 50,000 to be added. I recognise that even with that 50,000, there is a 69,000 deficit according to the budget that you've supplied us with. And I wonder, since you're sitting at the table, have you got any ideas as how to use them? How you meet that deficit? It surprises me that you've got so far without having a prepared financial backing before you actually got to where you did. I think all credit to you that you've had the tenacity to do it. So I'm not knocking you for what you've done, but to suddenly ask for 50,000 from this council, that is a big amount of money that to be given to one community group. And so that's my. So the question I have to Rosalie is: have you the funding deficit? Have you got a plan to meet that? And including what would your plan be if you didn't get the full 50 from us?
Yeah, part of that is deferred payments where we haven't taken, any income from it, but we've tracked our time. The other, we've actually put in other applications for funding. I forgot what I was going to say. Can you speak to the?
I'll just mention that we're hoping to recoup that from ticket sales. As we mentioned, about $60,000 worth of personal investment and time has gone into this film already. And we are applying to other areas. We were hoping to have we were hoping that our post-production outputs would be paid by the New Zealand Film Commission, who unfortunately did not see fit to support this regional project. And it's just we're pushing forward because we want to share this film, and we've got an amazing film. And yes, it's our financial plan has unfortunately not been is not gone to plan, I should say, Andrew.
Actually, I was going to start with Andrew in answer to your question. Yes, normally when you make a film, you get the producer, which I've been in that role, getting the funding together first. If I'd done that, it would be another 10 years before we've done it. And during the last 2 years, I've actually lost 3 of the participants in the film, Sue Behrens and Bruce Fraser and Brian Rogers. So the impetus for starting it was actually at the 10th anniversary, because I was working at the Weekend Sun, and Claire and Brian said, can you write the feature for the paper? Can you interview Brian? He had terminal cancer. And I said, well, can I film him? She said, why? And I said, because one day, I think it's really important that we do a film about the story of our city. She said, well, why don't we do it now? And I basically said, because funding, because it just costs so much to make a film. So we just got cracking and just did it, which is, you're quite right. You don't, go out and do that first. You put your ducks in a row in the other way. But if we'd done that, we would never be at this point. Yeah.
I have next Councillor Shirley, but can I just ask a question of you before we go to Councillor Shirley? And that is that this funding is essential to get the film to a state where it can be released and you get ticket sales. Is that right? It's the final finishing. It's sort of like getting you over the final hurdle before it can actually be shown and you can earn revenue of it. Yes. Is that right? Thank you. Councillor Shirley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is certainly a story that needs to be told. It's not just the city, it's the region, it's the country, actually. There was a national social and environmental tragedy. So I think, $50,000 to bring it to fruition is quite important. when you think of the hundreds of millions that were spent on the arena incident, directly, a whole lot more in a multiplier effect sense, it would probably be close to $1 billion. I don't know, someone will have the figure, but it would be up in that range. I think the objectives are laudable, and to hear the intention to make available for libraries and to the community, that's fantastic. But just picking up on Councillor Winter's point, verbal agreements aren't worth the paper they're written on. So to that extent, I think it's very important to have an MOU with the proprietors of the filming rights, so that that is recorded, and an understanding that it can be used for the council and other public bodies to use it for communication and learning and all those things. So thank you.
Thank you, and I do have some suggested words in my hand. I'll pass on to Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. Great to see you, Anton. Anton's a young man who approached the Merrill Forum, of all places, in Rotorua some years ago. And I think all of the councillors of the Bay of Plenty region backed you, except one at the time, but we got them over the line. So great to see you. But look, I'm in total agreement with what Councillor Shirley said. This is not just at what happened at the Astrolab, but there was containers washed up on beaches down or up the coast or wherever, and there was a big deal at the time. So I think we should be backing this 100%. In fact, there's probably 69,000 sitting around in a $183,000 budget that's not going to get used somewhere along the line. So fully supported, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor White, and then Councillor McMillan, Councillor Thurston.
Yeah, kia ora, well done. I did enjoy what I saw. And I agree with Councillor Shirley and also Councillor Campbell to support this wholeheartedly. As I was watching them tow that big container ship across the Wellington Harbour, trying to get into safe waters, there's a real lesson from an education from what happened, what you guys have recorded, and the experience of everybody in the community, experience from the iwi as well in terms of Motiti Island and other places. So absolutely value add here, but just tidying up some of the loose ends that have been mentioned would be great. But I absolutely support it. Well done.
Thank you, Councillor McMillan.
Yeah, kia ora, I totally echo everything that's been said, Councillor Shirley. And I think, it really aligns with our strategic direction, community engagement, working with the community, mana whenua. There's learnings, and I think also it's very easy for people to forget these tragedies. I think we need to be reminded of the environmental impact, and so that as an educational tool, with rallying volunteers, working together, working with mana whenua, but also environmental fragility and the impacts to the environment that we face and our risks we're facing need to be front of mind. So even for that alone, I think this film completion is really significant to us as a body. Thanks.
Councillor Thurston.
It's all been said, fully supported, and I move that the motion be put, Madam Chair.
We have possibly some suggested words there. I just want some clarification whether it is for Bay of Plenty Regional Council and community use. Was that your intention? Did I hear you correctly, Anton?
Yes, it is. I think community use would need clarification. Bay of Plenty Regional Council, I don't think there'd be any argument over there.
So we'll just leave it as Bay of Plenty Regional Council use. So I have
Other public bodies.
Happy with that condition and other public bodies?
Yes.
So we have a 1 and a 2 amended 2A. Do I have a mover?
Yep.
Councillor Scott and we have it. All right. Well, then I'm going to put that motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for support and your time.
I think you should have added in that you get VIP tickets.
To the wine and cheese.
So now we have an information only item, page 107, and it's our financial and non-financial performance report, the Arataki report, 9 months to 31st of March. So we have Kamaran as the chair. Thank you.
So councillors, this report provides you an overview of the organisation's performance for the 9 months ended to March. The report sets out the highlights of the impact areas that's in council strategic framework and service delivery highlights. In addition to that, there's also performance headline numbers in terms of actual versus forecast for the 9 months. In terms of the finances, the operating deficit forecast at the end of March is anticipated to be 7.2 million lower than the planned deficit, and operating spend is envisaged to be 6.2 million lower than planned, and the operating revenue $1 million higher than what was planned. There's also the capital expenditure forecast envisaged at 23.1 million versus budget of 42.5, so forecast at 23.1. Key reasons for the revised forecast is delays in projects around Rangitaki, Tarawera, and Pakatani Corona catchments, and timing and procurement related issues around the waterfront development, Key Street West Wing refurbishment. So those are the main reasons for the CapEx forecast at this point in time. So those are the headline numbers in financial performance and non-financial performance for council.
Thank you. Do we have questions, councillors? Councillor Winters?
Oh, just highlighting the fact, 2.4, page 109, 98% of non-notified consents were issued within the statutory timeframe of this quarter. That's marvellous, Madam Chair. I think I can recall it's been down around 60-70% at one stage. So in terms of upping the performance for non-notified consents, that's marvellous, excellent. So, you know, I think we've got to be careful when we talk about our budgets and setting our rates increase. We worked really hard on that to improve that, because that was a real customer performance barrier. So when you see that figure there, congratulations back to staff for seeing that. I think that's just superb.
Thank you.
And happy to move. I think it's just one, because the Bancorp is in publicly excluded.
So, Kamaran?
Just one minor correction I want to draw to council's attention on page 134. Headcount by location graphic is at 31 March 23, not 30 September 22. So just wanted to highlight that correction.
Thank you. Well, we've got to move it, but I have a question if I could ask. On page 133, the health and safety graph, it shows that both lag and lead indicators for Q3 were elevated. Is there any particular reason for that? Is it something we should be concerned about?
I can answer that, Madam Chair. No, you needn't be concerned. We still continue to keep our COVID statistics in this reporting. We will make a decision about whether we do that. But in the last quarter, we have had a small spike in COVID-related illnesses. And just also to let you know that in this last quarter, we did have a notifiable event. And so that is outlined that we had one. It was WorkSafe determined not to investigate that, and it was a contractor who was clearing weed blockages in preparation for Cyclone Gabrielle, and the contractor, the boom of the excavator brought down an overhead power line. So that is the notified event that this report refers to. The power line did not come down or land or touch on the machine, but we certainly have changed our practices in terms of ensuring that it doesn't happen again, and in particular that the walk around where the work is going to happen, to make sure that the contractors or our staff are aware of all the hazards and risks that are there. So that was that one notifiable event.
Thank you. I am advised that we do need the public excluded recommendation, but we will, I'll take that after we've had a seconder. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Scott. So if there are no further questions, I'm going to put that motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. So we, do we still have to move into excluded?
Like you have this, yes, like you have.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So